Hello and welcome to Payoff Pitch, the Action Network's baseball betting podcast presented by BetMGM. I'm Sean Zerillo. We're previewing the NL East today, and I'm joined by a couple of NL East fans. Mets fan Charlie DeSturco, Phillies fan Anthony DeBundo. We're going to break down the NL East, all of the teams in it. But before we get started, make sure to check out all of the other divisional previews that we've done. We've previewed all 5 other divisions aside from the NL East to this point. You can find them all on the Payoff Pitch feed. We've also previewed our favorite player props for the 2024 season. In addition to an off-season recap, we will be here every Monday, Tuesday, Friday throughout the season. And next week, on Monday, we will be dropping our favorite long shots for the 2024 season. And on Tuesday, our Korea series preview for the matchups between the San Diego Padres and the Los Angeles Dodgers for their pair of games over in Korea. And you don't want to miss any of our MLB trading previews, so make sure to subscribe to the podcast and get new episodes whenever they come out. As I said, Monday, Tuesday, Friday throughout the season. Also give us a 5-star review, please. We really appreciate all the feedback, especially if you give us 5 stars. Let's jump into our NL East preview and start with the Atlanta Braves. Highest projected win total, 101.5 in the betting market. I have this team at 102.2. The projection range out there from Fangraphs, Zips, Pacoda, etc. has them anywhere between 95 and 100.5 wins. So I'm the high man relative to those projected totals. But I like the Braves quite a bit, and I like them to win the World Series. Plus 650 is the number I got right now. The average projection out there, again, Fangraphs, Zips, Pacoda, has them anywhere between plus 385 and plus 475. So the Braves are the value team at this point. There's sites that have the Dodgers projected for more wins than the Braves, but that still give the Braves a higher World Series probability because they believe when these teams consolidate for the playoffs, the Braves have the better roster, more star talent, less depth is needed come playoff time. Now, obviously, Ronald Acuna Jr. dealing with some knee soreness in spring training, definitely worth keeping an eye on. But this team is a very safe bet to win the division, and I think there's actually value on them to win the division at minus 240. Am I laying it? Probably not. But if you look at the projected market, the value is certainly there. The average odds across those projection systems, minus 512, anywhere between 71% and 91% for the Braves. So even at that 71% level, you're still looking at a line of about minus 250, right in line with their listed odds. If you go any higher than that, there's clearly value in the Braves. In terms of betting their player props, I think there's 2 paths you can take. Number 1, Ronald Acuna Jr. stays healthy, continues to be the best player on the planet, wins the Triple Crown. Now, what would that entail? Well, that's Acuna continuing to be, as I said, number 1 by every projection metric that I have, including maximum exit velocity. Nobody hit the ball harder than Acuna last year. And I think if he lifts the ball more, he has the chance of 50 home runs. So Acuna to be the home run leader, long odds 22-1, or the RBI leader at 65-1. That's betting in to him winning a Triple Crown this season. And I think some interesting odds to do so. But if Acuna is out, if Acuna misses time, I think Michael Harris goes to the top of the lineup. I think Michael Harris is an interesting bet for MVP, but I prefer his hits leader bet. He projects 10th for me in terms of total hits for the season, but that's hitting 6th in the lineup. If he moves up to the number 1 or number 2 spot, the projection would obviously go substantially higher. And in terms of hits per plate appearance, both down the stretch last season and for this season, I project him 6th overall in baseball. So Michael Harris at 100-1 is the hits leader. And again, if Acuna's hurt, the guy I want from this team, aside from Harris, is Austin Riley. 50-1 for home run leader, 25-1 for ML MVP. He was 5th in National League WAR in the second half, just behind Matt Olson last season. Seemed to hit his breakout, not only in terms of offensively, but he's also the best defensive player on that team as well. So some paths to take, whether Acuna, you expect him to be healthy or not. I think there's value betting into both of those scenarios. Anthony, I'm going to kick it to you for probably our combined least favorite team in the world, the Atlanta Braves. As Mets and Phillies fans, I don't know if there's any team we hate more. Do you have any strong opinions over or under on the Braves for 2024?
So my fair odds on the Phillies to beat the Braves in the National League Division Series is about minus 1,000. But I do think Atlanta wins the division again. I don't think it's going to be that competitive. The story kind of out of Phillies camp is that like, oh, they want to make a run at the division this year, and they've kind of struggled the last 2 years. I don't really think they have the upside, and I think the Braves can pretty steadily win this division. But I will be fascinated to see how they approach kind of this September, August period, because they've gotten burned the last 2 years by not having their best pitchers fully healthy and available for the playoffs. While they rotate their starters and their everyday guys less than almost every team in baseball, they play the same lineup over and over and over again. They don't really use their bench. They don't really develop platoons are not their thing. And so what happened was, I think there was some fatigue that factored in. Anything can happen in a 4-game series, but this is 2 years in a row now where Charlie Morton was not available last year. He was compromised for the 2022 series. Bryce Elder had to start game 3 in Philadelphia because they didn't really have any other reliable pitchers beyond Strider and then Fried. And even Fried was dealing with blister problems at that time. 2 years ago, it was Strider who was dealing with the oblique problem, wasn't throwing as hard, couldn't last against Philly. So the last 2 years, they've gone into a series against a talented Philly team in the playoffs, and they have lost to an inferior team because they weren't, quite operating at peak efficiency. And now I think the Chris Sale signing is probably the most interesting way of how they manage him, because they need to have him healthy and ready for September and October. The Braves have proven everything they can already do in the regular season. They don't get any benefit by winning 100 games. They are going to win the division for the umpteenth year in a row. I agree there's probably some value in betting them, but I think there is some downside risk that maybe they don't take it as seriously, but I still think that they're going to roll this division and win 97, 98, 99 games. And then it's just okay, just about half of their players had career years at the same time. Acuna cut his strikeout rate from 23% to 11%, and improved his barrel rate and max EV. That kind of production probably has to take a step back and regress toward what he's been the majority of his career to this point prior to last year. So I think you can bake in some regression for him, but I think you identified the one guy in the lineup that's most interesting to me, and that is Michael Harris, because Harris, had a horrible first half of the season. He dealt with some injuries. He was threatened to lose his place in the lineup for a bit there. They didn't really have anybody to replace him, so they stuck with him, and he ended up kind of paying off with that and was elite in the second half of the season again and looked more like the rookie we saw. There's been some interesting stuff with him in spring training where he's swinging and missing more, but he's also getting to more power. Not a ton of at bats, but he could be the next kind of Braves power breakout guy who hits 25, 30 homers. He has the potential to do it. Double-digit barrel rates, 113 max EV. He has the tools to hit 30 homers. So I haven't been able to find a straight Michael Harris home run prop for over-unders, but I'm interested in his overs. So I think he's going to hit for more power this year. And he's a guy that if he cuts the chase rate, that would be the biggest thing for him taking a leap into superstar potential, if he can cut down on his swings out of the zone. So, you're seeing some encouraging signs from Harris. He swung and missed less last year, but again, if he's going to chase power and cut down on the chase rate, that's what takes the leap into superstardom. So yeah, long shot MVP, not a terrible idea. Looking for a home run over on him, but really it's a lineup that has so much depth, and even the one spot that probably isn't that strong, maybe two spots if you count Arcia, is Jared Kelenic, which is a bet on upside that if it doesn't work out, they can just trade for a cheap corner outfield bat at the deadline and they won't have any problems.
Yeah, I think he's an upgrade over Eddie Rosario from last year. He might be the one guy they would consider platooning, potentially with David Fletcher. We'll see how that plays out. But this Braves offense is just so deep, so ridiculously good. And when you watch them, especially when you have bets against them and they come back in the late innings, you're like, is this team cheating? Feels like they're cheating. What are they getting signs from center field? What's going on? The offense is so ridiculously good. You literally feel like the only way they could be doing this is if they know the pitches are coming at times. Charlie, I know you're in agreement with me on Austin Riley for home run leader. Curious if we have any agreement elsewhere, or if you have any ways that you're considering betting the Braves from a team perspective.
Yeah, I kind of lean toward the under because of what Anthony said. There's not much more to add to both of you guys' points. I think they're going to run away with the division. And I think that, maybe they kind of pull back a bit, and the addition of Sale, his injury history is definitely a concern at times, and how they manage him and Morton getting older and Max Fried's up and down injury history is definitely a concern for me for the long term in the regular season, and how they manage will be interesting to see. And plus, when you have a win total above 100, it's hard to continually win 100 plus games, but a team that can do it is Atlanta. So there's no way that I want a piece of it. I just want to, back them in long shot futures perspectives. Like you said, Austin Riley, 50-1 most home runs, 13-1 in the most RBI. The Bat X has him, tied for first in the RBI run, just about top 5 to 10 everywhere you look. And then you mention, his second half of the season. In 70 games, he had 21 homers and 53 RBIs. I mean, you double that. He's probably around that 40 to 50 home run mark, about 100, 115, 20 RBIs. He's hitting right in that middle of the lineup, in front of Olsen and behind Acuna and Albies, who are on-base machines. So push comes to shove. I really like Austin Riley here from a long-term perspective. The Braves as a whole, I mean, I agree with you. Like, I think that this is a team that you would back for the World Series because of how they're built and how dominant they are, and the variance that comes with, the pricing on the Dodgers right now is just something I don't want to be invested in. But push comes to shove, there's a lot of lesser teams in this division that the Braves can just easily mash up on. So not really touching them from a total or, to make the play or to win the division perspective.
My breakout pick for this team is AJ Smith-Shawver, 21-year-old pitcher. Saw him a little bit last year, but the more I've been reading about Smith-Shawver, the more I like. Number one, this is a guy who was a two-sport athlete in high school, was not playing baseball full-time, drafted, ascended through the minors very quickly after undergoing complete mechanical overhaul this spring, throwing the ball 97 miles an hour, up significantly from where he was last season. Going to start the year in the minors. I think AJ Smith-Shawver is one of the Braves starting pitchers come playoff time. Maybe their number 4 starter, but I think he's in the mix at the end of the year, expecting a breakout for AJ Smith-Shawver. Anthony, we're going to move on to your favorite team, the Philadephia Phillies, team we bet on in October. The past couple of years let us down on the NLCS last year. Obviously, I'm towards the higher end of the projection. Actually, I'm the high man in the projection market on the Phillies. I put them in 88.2. The market has them anywhere between 84.3 and 88 wins, a total of 89.5. So everybody kind of likes them to go under. I would not bet it unless it crossed the 90.5, and I doubt it gets there. It's been sitting at 89.5 the past few years. Tough to get it over 90 considering the Braves at the top of the division. Anthony, I do not have any team bets on the Phillies. There is technically value on their under and the Phils to miss the playoffs. Not touching either considering they may continue to add pieces and obviously the position that they're in. But do you have some player props? Anything you like on your Phils, either from a team perspective or a player prop perspective?
Yeah, so I'm kind of in line with where the market is on the wins. I think like 88 to 90 is probably where they come in again. I think there's room to be optimistic and room to be pessimistic. The optimism case is that they didn't really get full seasons out of Trey Turner or Bryce Harper. Bryce Harper only played, he missed the first 2 months and then wasn't himself the first month or so coming back. It wasn't until August that he really found that power again, coming off the Tommy John, and looked like the Bryce Harper that won the MVP the last time he was fully healthy. And then Trey Turner, who had a terrible first 3 months in Philly, was kind of swinging out of his shoes and definitely feeling the effects of the contract, didn't really play up to his standards until the second half either. So with those two guys taking step forwards, these are the 2 superstar players on the Phillies that they pay the most money to, at least in terms of hitters. So that's the reason for optimism. The reason for pessimism is just the zero depth. They're like 1 or 2 injuries away from being in some real trouble here because the bench right now is Whit Merrifield, who's like a fine utility backup. And then it's Edmundo Sosa, Jake Cave, Christian Pache, and Garrett Stubbs. And there's no help in the upper minors. Like there are no really ability to fade injuries. They have 7, 8 guys they're going to play every day. They have maybe 1 platoon with Marsh and Merrifield. Rojas is interesting, at least, to start. But I think the narrative around the Phillies is that they're this beer league softball team who hits a lot of homers and doesn't play defense. I'm going to say that what's going to surprise everybody, and we're going to talk about midseason, is that the Phillies are going to win with pitching and defense this year more than they are their lineup. And obviously they have Bryce Harper and he's great, but this lineup isn't as deep compared to how deep the pitching staff is and how good the defense is. They're elite in center field. They're elite in left field. I think Harper's going to be a great first baseman, and Stott's elite at second, and Realmuto's good behind the plate. That's 5 clear plus positions defensively for Philadelphia, which has not been true in basically my entire life. So it's pretty exciting. The bullpen has a ton of flamethrowers and depth and variety. So I think the most interesting Philly I'm buying this year is Chris Sanchez. Sanchez is an interesting case because I'm going to write a column where I kind of identify, 10-ish pitchers that I want to bet on. I haven't really finalized the list yet. It'll be out before opening day. But he used to be a great stuff guy who had no command, and they kind of tore him down. And Matt Gelb wrote a nice piece about how they've kind of changed him. They rebuilt him around a sinker and a changeup, and he cut the walk rate big time last year, but he wasn't throwing that hard, so the strikeout rate was okay, not great. He threw a lot of ground balls, but had a major home run problem. Well, this year he's throwing harder in spring training, and it hasn't affected his command yet. So he has the ability to throw harder. They were just dialing him back. So if he's able to combine both of those skills, where he's throwing hard but also maintaining the command and keeps the ball on the ground like he was last year, he could be elite. And maybe not elite, but like a real number 2 starter, I think, or 3 starter for this team. And it wasn't that fluky. I mean, he gave up a 22% home run to fly ball rate last year and still had a 3.7 xERA. So I'm a believer in Sanchez as the third best pitcher, and wouldn't even shock me if he made a run at like Nola for the second job, which is crazy for me to say. But I'm a believer in Sanchez, and the one concern again is just the depth. If they can't really fade hitter injuries. The play I like is Bryce Harper at 12-1 to win the National League MVP. The projection markets don't like Harper this year. They think he's a negative defender, which, I get. Like, he didn't play defense the last 2 years, basically. But he showed in limited time. He played 300 innings at first base. He was plus in range and overall an average first baseman. That was his first time ever playing the position. Harper's going to have elite athleticism and range there, given just who he is. And I think he could be a great first baseman, which would add a ton of value to his WAR numbers. And then as a hitter, this is his first normal and full spring since 2021. There was the lockout. Then there was the Tommy John. He didn't have a spring last year, came back midseason. Even 2 years ago, he injured the elbow and then he broke his thumb on that hit by pitch. So he wasn't himself that year either. The last time we saw Harper at full strength, the numbers are bonkers how good he was in the second half, like Barry Bonds level numbers in the second half of 2021. And he was back to MVP level in the second half of last season. So I think Harper at 12-1 has upside in the National League. Acuna's the obvious favorite, but if he falls off a little bit, Harper's the guy. And you can just kind of see the narrative, which is like, oh, this guy's learning a new position, playing a great first base, has a one OPS, and then he wins MVP. So 12-1 for me on Harper. I think the market's just down on him because of injuries, which, makes sense, but I think he has upside.
Charlie, I'll get to your thoughts in a second. I do want to piggyback, though, off the Harper MVP conversation here because he is my pick for NL MVP. Agree completely. I think the projections are underselling Harper here because of the injury sample that's baked into his stats from the past couple seasons. He dealt with he was injured clearly in 2022 before getting the Tommy John surgery. So that's the down season there. Came back too early last season, only hit 3 home runs in the first half, was fully healthy in the second half, and posted a 166 WRC plus in the second half of last season. He posted a 170 in his 2021 NL MVP campaign. His home run pace in the second half of last year was ahead of his pace for 2021. Going to be playing first base. Should keep him in the lineup more as opposed to playing the outfield. He only played 141 games. There he won the MVP. He finished in third in wins above replacement behind Tatis and Soto. He had the highest OPS in baseball that year, 1044. And in my article, yes, I talk about wins above replacement. You've probably seen me tweet about wins above replacement. But aside from the counting stats and WAR is the most important factor. Obviously, you have counting stats too. But the other data point that matters most for MVP winners is OPS ranking. And Harper is ahead of the field in OPS ranking. And again, got to be healthier playing first base. I think the projections are underselling him. Absolutely love him for NL MVP at 12-1. Would bet this down to about 10-1. The final thing I want to mention, talked about this on the AL West pod yesterday. Seager. It is the selective aggression engagement rate. It's a stat developed by Baseball Prospectus this offseason. Great article, worth checking out. Seager number 1, Bryce Harper number 2, Acuna, Trout, Soler, Judge, Vlad, Devers, Soto, all top 10. The one name on there that sticks out, which is a little weird, is Manuel Rivera from the Diamondbacks, so maybe a hitter worth keeping an eye on. But this is plate approach, and we know Harper's healthy. We know the power should be there again this year. But when you actually measure that relative to his plate skills and his approach, he's probably a top 2 hitter in terms of discipline and pitches he's actually looking for that he can drive. So love Harper's health coming together with skills that are very obviously amongst the best for hitters in all of baseball. The one other player prop on this team that I like, Kyle Schwarber to lead the league in RBI at 120 to 1. It's a ridiculous number. Probably can't win out of the leadoff spot. It might be tough, but the Bat X has him second in RBI projections. Every player he's projected around is between 10 to 1 and 20 to 1. I believe I have him 6th to 8th in RBI for the season. Again, everybody he's on the leaderboard near is like 25 to 1 at worst for RBI leader. He's 120 to 1. It's a joke. So if Schwarber by some chance moves down the lineup, if they get tired of him in the leadoff spot, I think that ticket is super live. I think it's live anyway in the leadoff spot if he has a little bit more luck this year. But Harper MVP, maybe my favorite bet for National League player props this season. Charlie, any thoughts on the Phillies? As I mentioned, just to reiterate, I'm at the higher end of the projection, but the public projection likes the under. Any underplay from you here?
No, I think that the way I'm going to play them is just like every single year we have the past few years, and that's buying them in the middle of the season. I think that, Anthony presents a good opportunity with, this team doesn't have the strength of depth. And when I look at this rotation in particular, the back end does not love me. I mean, Christopher Sanchez is an interesting option, but I'm not high on Taijuan Walker. I think Ranger Suarez is a bit inconsistent. Aaron Nola obviously had his struggles, ups and downs last year. And so this Phillies, obviously they have the bullpen to kind of, that's built for postseason success. But I think that I wouldn't be surprised to see the Phillies have a couple of ups and downs throughout, and then you can buy them at a lower point, especially, whether it's, to make the playoffs or to win the East, because push comes to shove, basically the same roster mold from last season that we saw where they were just a game away from winning the National League and all the variance and volatility. A team like the Phillies that have a good bullpen, that no longer have Craig Kimbrell there anymore, kind of stand a chance to make a deep run. And with, as you said, Trey Turner and Bryce Harper kind of putting it all together for a full season, they really do have one of the higher ceilings in the National League. But just a team that I don't really want to take a position on quite yet. I do say that the one prop that I do like from this team is Trey Turner over 27.5 stolen bases. He had 30 last year. The Bat X projects him closer to the mid 30 range. And you look at, and Anthony mentioned it, Turner had, quite literally one of the worst starts of the season you could ask for coming over to Philadelphia, and he still stole 30 bases. I'm expecting his on-base percentage to go up more. He's hitting with a lot more confidence, or he hit with a lot more confidence toward the tail end of the season. Zerlo, we talked about this before. Stolen base attempts might even go up again this season, which means a guy like Trey Turner, who is, their main option to kind of move around the bases, and he hits in the top of the lineup to get on base for the guys, in that 3 to 6 spot, he might be a little bit more aggressive. So I wouldn't be surprised, as long as he stays healthy, if he gets in that mid 30, even 40 range.
He was 30 for 30 too. I mean, he's not caught a single time. So just keep going. There's data out there. I'm not sure of the exact article, but there's a research article that proves that when players sign big contracts, move to a new city, there's like a 3-month adjustment period where they really struggle compared to past performances. So worth keeping an eye on for fantasy, for betting at the start of these seasons. The guys who are big free agents, sign big contracts, adjusting to new cities, likelier than most to have a performance dip, especially early in the season. But you look at Turner's numbers for the year, I mean, they're pretty incredible considering that awful start he had. So Trey Turner, definitely a guy to buy for 2024. Christopher Sanchez, a guy I like quite a bit, who Anthony mentioned. Anthony, before we leave your Phillies, if you were the GM, I'm kind of low on Nick Castellanos this year. I think his plate skills are going to continue to decline. I think he may become a hole in their lineup. And if he's not hitting, obviously, he's not giving you anything defensively either. But as they're currently constructed right now, if you're the GM, what piece are you going out and targeting to add to this team to get them over the hump into World Series contention?
I think the biggest hole for the Phillies is another outfield bat because Marsh had a career year last year, 125 WRC plus, but it feels like he could regress off of that. Rojas has not proven he can hit at the major league level whatsoever. And I don't know if Christian Pache is going to make the roster. He's interesting because he's out of options, so he might get traded. And then, you mentioned it with Castellanos. Like, Castellanos is another guy. Same thing with Turner. Signed a big contract. Awful for the first few months of that. Picked it up, a little bit in the second half, and then had a great year last year, especially the first half. Now it's, though, like you mentioned it, we talked about this, declining plate skills are concerning, and he's making contact less, so strikeout rate could be bad. But Castellanos, I also think is going to hit 7th. I think people are expecting him to hit 4th. I think Real Muto might actually do that based on the lineups we've been seeing in spring training. So we'll see. But I think outfield bat, maybe they go out and get like a bench power bat or some kind of right-handed hitting patience guy. Like I wanted Tommy Pham in the offseason. They're obviously not going to sign him, but I think that there could be like a addition there. Maybe Mike Trout is a Philly by the time we get to the end of the season.
That's been my hot take for a couple of years now. I think it'll happen eventually. Do not know if it'll happen this year, maybe next offseason. I definitely think it's going to happen at some point. Let's move on to my New York Mets. Charlie's New York Mets. Big range of outcomes on this team. Honestly, I think this is one of the bigger teams with a wider range of outcomes of all the teams in baseball this season. Public projections would agree. Projected range of 76 to 83 wins. 7-win gap is one of the bigger I've seen. I'm at 79.9, so right smack dab in the middle. Do not see any value on the Mets from a team perspective. Do not see any value from a player perspective. I do not have a single bet on my Mets coming into the season. If you want to know my level of homerism when it comes to betting, it is absolutely zero. I like this team a lot for 2025. We will start talking about it more as we progress. I think this team is going to make a leap next year. I think this team is going to be a lot of fun in 2025. They're loaded with prospects in the minors. I like the way David Stearns is building this organization. I like the way Steve Cohen is allowing this thing to be built patiently, not running in, signing a bunch of free agents whose contracts are going to turn out to be sour. I think they're doing this correctly, acquiring prospects, building up a very young and athletic core with a lot of speed and a lot of on-base skills. By the time Luis Angel Acuna, Drew Gilbert, Jet Williams, these guys are in the major leagues. This Mets team is going to be very athletic and very fun to watch on the base pass. So really excited to see what they're building. I think Francisco Alvarez is in for a breakout year. This kid is going to be a superstar. But as I said, do not have any bets on this team from a preseason perspective. Charlie, were you able to find any betting angle on our Mets? Is there anything that you like for 2020?
I think I might dabble on them to make the playoffs north of 2-1, just because of when you look at the rest of the NL, I'm just not as high on some of those bubble teams. And a team like the Mets, when it comes to their offense should still be decent, and they made the necessary pickups. Marte is going to decline as he's continuing doing as he gets up there in age, but they go out, they get Bader. Mark Vientos is finally showing some sort of life in the spring training. They've made small adjustments in the bullpen. Obviously, the big thing is Diaz does return, so at least they have a reliable, ninth inning option, which they just completely blew countless leads last season. At least now they have a guy that can pitch, whether it's 1 to 2 innings just to close the door in big moments. And I like what they've been doing, like you said, right? Like they add Shintaro Fujinami, who has high upside, also a very, very low floor. They go out, they get a guy like Jorge Lopez. They're starting to build a team all together. Their rotation, a bunch of new names. We didn't get a full season of Quintana last year. They go out, they get DeBundo's guy from last preseason, Sean Manaea, who's also on that team, and Hauser. They're making like little necessary adjustments. But I just think that when you look at the rest of the teams around them, like Arizona, obviously, overperformed last season. They'll probably still be in the mix for the playoffs. But then Philly, DeBundo's mentioned their lack of depth. That could sting them. I'm not high on the Cardinals. I'm not too high on the Cubs. The Giants are an interesting look, but when the Mets at this number right now at north of 2-1, I think it's worth a little bit of a sprinkle. Obviously, Senga's injury looms large, and I think you have to monitor that. But I think that everyone, I feel like it's almost become a rare, public is all over the under on the Mets, when normally you'd expect a New York market to get a ton of over. But everything that I've heard around this team has been mostly negative, and that's kind of where my ears perk up and I look to buy back. So, they still have guys like Alonso and Lindor to finish the job. They have the youth that I wouldn't be surprised if they're kind of in the mix come, the middle of the season, that they buy at the deadline or bring up all these young prospects and give them a shot. So yeah, I think that if you want to dabble, I wouldn't take their wins over. I would look more toward that, 250 number that it is out there to make the playoffs.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting approach, right? Either the under or bet to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
The win total over not as interesting as more of an upside play as getting a wild card. Yeah, I think this team either bottoms out again or they're probably adding pieces looking to contend. It's kind of a goofy build. There is upside there. I think Brett Beatty, if he finally gets enough at bats and the crowd gives him a chance and some patience, could finally break out. I like the skills for Brett Beatty. Just hasn't put it together in the big leagues, but there's upside here. And there's a lot of guys who could hit a bunch of home runs. Jeff McNeil, not a guy who can hit home runs, but had a down season last year. Maybe bounces back, gets closer to a 5-win player. So lots of very wide range of outcomes with this Mets team, aside from the rotation. Without Senga, the rotation is kind of sketchy, and a bunch of number 3 and 4s. Severino, the one upside guy there who I think could pop, but also a big injury risk as well. Anthony, I know you're a consistent win total under bet on the Mets. Are you following through with that strategy again this year?
Well, it's funny because I joked about this on last year's show that I bet the Mets under almost every year, and I bet the Braves to win the division every year. But this year, it's like I really can't because I agree. We just talked about this with the White Sox. Like the 3 biggest differences in win totals from last year to this year, going downward, are the Padres, which makes sense. Their roster kind of got gutted. The Mets and the White Sox. If your big strategy coming into the season is to fade the Mets, the White Sox, and the Padres, you're selling at the absolute floor of those 3 teams. And I really don't think the Mets floor is any lower than what it's priced at right now. But again, the scenarios where they hit the floor, you mentioned Cohen's patience. He kind of toggled, right? Because early on he was so aggressive, and now he's kind of realizing that you can't really do it that way. What does this team look like post deadline though? Because anybody who has a good year for the Mets, that's a veteran, is liable to be traded. Severino, Manaea, Marte, even if he has a bounce back year, like Bader could realistically be moved, and Alonso, right? So there's a lot of pieces on this team that it's really hard to see. And I see a world where the Mets are sitting at 500 or right below 500 come trade deadline. And they're tracking to go, maybe if they make a push, they could win 85, 84, 83. But are they going to make the push? That's, I think, the biggest question mark. And I don't really know how to get a read on that. So I think the Mets are more of an in-season team for me. I'm going to look to play to make or miss the playoffs, depending on how they start. Maybe even go against it, depending on what the first couple months look like. But I am buying Severino. I mean, we bet him a lot and probably lost money on him last year. But the stuff numbers always look fine. It was the home run problem that killed him. But he's not going to be pitching in Yankee Stadium anymore. That could help the home run numbers for him. Mets Citi Field's a much more friendly park for pitchers. And he also, I think, was pitching hurt. There was a clear velo dip at points last season that affected him. And so the strikeout rate did decline. But when Severino's been on the mound, he's been great. So I'm going to be buying him start to start. I'm also still buying Manaea. He was in a weird role last year, but he still got to a 4.2 xFIP and had pitching metrics right around 4.2, which is right around league average, and had a career high in K rate. And he was also, like I said, he was pitching 3 innings, then 1 inning, then 2 innings, and the whole Kapler system that I don't think really got buy-in from the players. So there's potential for Manaea to show some life here, and he was actually better last year than past years, even though he didn't end up starting for the Giants. It was a weird situation. But yeah, I think the biggest problem is it's just if you're the Mets and you're Cohen, how do you buy at the deadline, knowing that the Dodgers, the Braves, and the Phillies are sitting there probably ahead of you with much more talented rosters? It just seems very short-sighted to be yes, we are the New York Mets. The fans are not going to be excited about a 5 seed in the National League playoffs if they have no real chance of making a run at the top 3. So I kind of don't really know what to do with the Mets because of that big question mark.
Yeah, I think I'm waiting for 2025. I think their sights are set on rookie Sasaki at the top of their rotation alongside Senga next season. And then going from there, as you mentioned, Anthony, potential to sell at the deadline. Look who's in charge now. It's David Stearns, who sold Josh Hader from a competitive Brewers team. And this is a GM who has no issue with the team in the hunt selling pieces off if he thinks it's going to help them in the future. And I would imagine that's a similar philosophy that Steve Cohen holds as well. Getting around the fan base in New York, if they trade Pete Alonso, there might be a riot. But beyond that, other pieces on this team I think are definitely expendable. I do, though, like the way that Stearns has sort of built this roster in terms of ensuring that there are no below average players on it. They have much more depth than they've had in previous years. They had no depth on their David Epler. This team is much deeper, and they can actually sustain injuries and keep going. So Mets closer to a 500 team, no value in terms of a team betting perspective, though, for me. we'll monitor things in season. Other than that, I think we're looking ahead to next year. The Miami Marlins, I think we might have some disagreement here. Now, I was higher on the Marlins earlier in the offseason before they started sustaining pitching injuries. Braxton Garrett, Edward Cabrera, both going down during the spring. This team overachieved significantly last season, +9 wins versus their Pythagorean run differential. If you flip the result of every one-run game, the Marlins finished 64-97, 20 wins below their actual record. So a lot of luck baked in. I still like their bullpen quite a bit for 2024. Tanner Scott, Nardi, Bender, Sixto Sanchez in the bullpen. That could be an interesting factor. Maybe Sixto takes over the closer's role at some point. So earlier in the offseason, I bet the Marlins to make the playoffs at +300. As I said, I do not love it as much now. Not only the injuries they already have, but also Josh Chisholm always gets hurt. Luis Ariz has struggled to make it through the end of the season with leg injuries. There's just a lot of upside in their rotation. If Cabrera and Garrett too come back, you add that to Luzardo, who I like to win the Cy Young this year at 40-1. Yuri Perez, who is a future Cy Young contender. Max Meyer coming off Tommy John surgery. Maybe he can give them contributions. But there is a lot of upside in the pitching here. Luzardo has been mentioned as a trade candidate, which I find very interesting. That certainly lowers the ceiling on this team if they're already looking to trade pieces who seem like they should be part of their competitive core. But just in terms of Cy Young, Luzardo, a guy I've always been high on, always thought he had a chance to win a Cy Young when he was younger. Struck out 200 batters last year. He's in a great home park. He throws harder than any other left-handed starter. The numbers aren't necessarily super impressive below the hood, but when you combine the 200 strikeouts, the innings, the park, he does have the chance to potentially cash in at 40-1. So I like the Marlins potentially make the playoffs, not as much as I did earlier in the offseason, as I mentioned. Anthony, though, I saw you fire Marlins under, I believe, 77.5 wins into the app yesterday. Give me the breakdown on that one.
Yeah, so the Marlins squeezed every drop of quality out of their roster last year. That's my read on the situation. Like, they pretty much made, Kim Ng was aggressive at the deadline. They went out and plugged a bunch of holes and found some pieces to put together, and they ended up getting a team that got them over the line to the playoffs with 84 wins. The Pythag showed they were pretty lucky to get there, and now they lose their ace. Like, Sandy's not pitching, and he, his 200 innings every year were so valuable to resting their bullpen, to lengthening their rotation, which doesn't have the reliability and depth. Like, they have a lot of guys where, like, maybe this guy could break out, maybe this guy could break out, but they don't have guys who have reliably pitched 160, 70 innings. Yuri Perez, the Marlins have been very clear that they're going to be conservative with his usage in his age 2021 season. They shut him down despite being in the playoff race last year. And I think that, if they're in a similar situation, they may do the same thing again. If he gets to like 160 innings, they don't want to push him beyond that. So I think there's concerns there. Also, there's turnover, right? New GM, heading in a bit of a different direction. I don't see them making moves at the deadline to try to do that playoff run again, given that they just did it last year and that they don't want to kind of tax the farm system and make a move for this season, when it seems like the move away from Kim Ng is more of a move for the longer term because of a difference in opinion on kind of like what spending was going to look like, et cetera. And I kind of think, like, if you look at the young bats on this team, who's the guy that's going to take the step forward? Outside of Jazz Chisholm's new diet, where he's not eating McDonald's anymore, there's not a ton to like about this team. And I also don't even think Jazz is that good. Like, he's awesome in fantasy. We love him in fantasy. If you have him, he's like a 30-30 guy who could hit, 35 homers and steal a ton of bases. But, like, he has never had elite stats in his career. He had one elite stretch in 2022, but then, dealt with injuries for large stretches of other seasons. And he's projected a 305 OBP. So, like, he's a 110 WRC plus guy who plays good defense. That's, like, valuable, but it's not, like, I don't think he has superstar upside because of his flaws as a hitter, just like chasing and swinging and missing. So I'm not as high on the Marlins upside. I think, like, they got everything they could out of Jake Berger last year. Odds are he just doesn't replicate that insane season, and they find the hole in his swing. And, with them being a 75 win team last year, and I think potentially getting worse, I like the Mets more this year. I think the top of the division is still good. I think the Marlins are a clear step back candidate this season. I like their under 77.5.
Charlie, any thoughts for you specifically regarding these Marlins? Not really sure, aside from the swagger that they have with Tim Anderson and Jazz Chisholm, as Anthony said, like where they're going to get significant offensive contributions from. Anderson was awful last year. Maybe he bounces back and is, back to all-star form now that he's finally out of Chicago. But yeah, I mean, it seems like the ceiling is certainly limited on this team, and they do project to take a step back. But any opinions for you on the Marlins?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of on Anthony's side here on the under, especially with the injuries that have come out of camp on the pitching side. Because as they start adding up and you don't have these guys like Cabrera and Garrett that are starting or ready for opening day, then really what do you have in that 4-5 option? Like Ryan Weathers, and that guy was horrific in San Diego, and I'm not too high on him in general. But while their bullpen, grades out decently well, the rest of the team I'm just not too high on. Like Fortes is fine, but then you look down and up and down the roster, like you got a career year out of Luis Arias, and now is he going to repeat it again? And we saw, especially as you mentioned, kind of tailed off toward the end of the season. I just think that this is one of those teams that, especially at the middle of the season, probably will look to sell guys that if they can even get rid of guys. I think that the overall consensus of this team is probably looking toward the future and looking toward a rebuild. And as you mentioned, last year with all the luck in the 1-run games, you tend to think that it kind of comes back around. It does most of the time. So I think that this is a team that, you can look to fade, especially early on in the season with this lack of pitching depth. And as the season goes on, you would assume that things kind of stack up against them, and then it ultimately just culminates in an implosion in the second half. So I'm much higher on the Mets than the Marlins here. So, it kind of makes sense for me to like their under more so than anything else.
Yeah, I think just the biggest thing is the Sandy. They were 77.5 last year. I think we all bet the over, and we like the Marlins. But now they don't have Sandy Alcantara. That's a huge swing to the other guys who are just not that reliable. And you mentioned it with the rise. I think the league figured him out a little bit, because there was differences in how the outfield started playing him in the second half of the season, where they said, look, if he hits a double over our heads, okay, but he's hitting so many balls into this exact area that we can start to take it away, especially when nobody's on base, where it's like, oh, we're just not going to let you drop in your singles because you're so good with your back control that you can just drop singles over the outfield or over the infield and in front of the outfield. They started playing him more shallow, and it really affected his second half. A lot of balls that were hits in the first half weren't in the second half. And I kind of think Charlie's right. Like, he had a career year and he's still going to hit 300, but I don't know if he's going to hit 350, and that's, I think, the biggest difference.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Going back to that Seager metric again, Arise ranks very low by that metric. He puts the bat on the ball. He does not strike out, does not walk at all. But he's also not necessarily swinging at good pitches. He just makes contact with anything. It's very hard to get him to whiff, but he's not making good swing decisions. And I think that's very important. If he had these elite contact skills and was also swinging at pitches that were great for him to drive, that's one thing. But he's just kind of flailing at everything. His nickname is the Sprinkler. He's hitting whatever he can without a very selective approach. So, yeah, given the injuries and given the way that it could be easy for teams to adjust to his style, he also doesn't have much speed, right? You could play that outfield a little bit more shallow and kind of threaten him to hit it over their heads. He's probably not getting a triple out of it. You may still hold him to a double with that speed. So, yeah, Rye's a bit of a flawed player, but still one of my favorite hitters to watch, just awesome, because that ball is always going in play and you never know what you're getting out of him. And when he pops a home run, it's pretty fun too, because he really seems to have more power than he actually leans into. I remember that WBC game, he hit 2 home runs and it was just like, is Luis Arias going to hit 20 home runs this year? But no, it's probably capped at 10 or 15. So
he hit an opposite field home run the first Phillies game I went to last year to complete the cycle, which was just the most insane evening. And then the fans started throwing hot dogs. So it was a good night.
Philly fans throwing.
They ended our dog night because of Luis Arias' cycle when the fans started throwing hot dogs to one another and onto the field.
Incredible. That brings us to the team projected to finish last in the National League East. The team I project to finish last in all of baseball this season, not necessarily by my win projection. I put the Nationals at 60.8. I was at 60.2 last season on this team. The projection market has them anywhere between 58.6 and 65 wins. I think the most interesting of them, though, is Pacoda, who has this team at 57.8 wins. They were at 61.4 last season. And when Pacoda goes lower on a team, especially by that much, I think it's very interesting. But they're more than 8 wins below their listed total. So that's a big outlier. And it's the biggest outlier for me relative to any of my win total projections. I like this under, I'd say down to about 65.5. As I said, I projected at 60.8. You look at the composite projection that I have, it puts the Nationals at 62.2 wins. The public projection at 65.5. So 65.5, 66 wins or lower would be a bet for me on the Nationals under. And as I said, I also like them to finish with the fewest wins in baseball. I got 12-1 on that. If you can get 10-1 or better, I think it's a solid bet. We talked about the teams in this division, all of which should win about 77, 78 games or more. The Nationals overachieved last season, +4 by Pythagorean run differential, +7 in one-run games. They should not have a good bullpen. They do not have the type of talent. I mean, they signed John Candelario and ended up flipping him in season last year. They have guys like Joey Gallo and Nick Senzel, Eddie Rosario, who may be in a similar situation this year. But they're in no rush to bring up their prospects. This is another team that's looking ahead to 2025. James Wood was great in spring. Dylan Cruz probably could earn his way to the big leagues in short order. I don't think these guys are coming up until September. I don't think they're coming up until their service clocks delayed next season. So probably the month and a half mark of 2025, that's when you start seeing James Wood and Dylan Cruz. I think the Nationals are a year away at least from trying to put their next competitive team on the field. You still see Patrick Corbin in that rotation. This is a team who I think finally bottoms out this year after coming back. I think they had a dead count pass, a dead count bounce. 3-2-1. I think they had a dead cat bounce last year. I think this year they bottom out before getting the number 1 pick and then moving into their next competitive phase. So for me, the Nationals under, one of my favorite bets for this season, under down to about 65. Anthony, I believe you might have also fired this win total in yesterday as well. Nationals under, a bet for you too?
Yes. I bet the under 59.5 last year and lost. Now they're giving me an extra 7 or 8 wins, so I'm going to bet it again. I don't really think anything happened last year that made me think I was wrong. I mean, obviously I was wrong, but the lack of power in the lineup was glaring last season. They finished second to last in ISO behind only Cleveland, or ahead of only Cleveland. They had a really low strikeout rate and a really low walk rate, so it was just like kind of, we're going to put a ton of balls in play, and they ran good. I mean, they had a league average BABIP despite not hitting the ball hard. They had one of the lowest barrel rates, lowest hard hit rates, yet ran an average BABIP, which is really hard to sustain. BABIP tends to correlate strongly to how hard you hit the ball. And the Nationals didn't do that very much. And I think it's interesting, like, they could go younger. Like, they're relying, based on WRC projections, their top 2 projected hitters this year are Jesse Winker and Joey Gallo, who are 2 vets that we've seen more than enough from at this point to know that they're not going to be high upside guys. So maybe they do give the rookies an earlier shot. That probably won't go well for them in 2024 because Winker and Gallo have low upside because of their age, but they also have proven themselves as capable major leaguers. Whereas, like James Wood and Dylan Cruz are projected to be terrible as rookies. And so if you're Washington, why play the old guys like Meneses and Gallo and Winker when the youngs are the future? They could go to the younger guys. I understand the service time manipulation is part of it too, so maybe we won't see them. But the roster looked pretty similar to last year when the line was 59.5. We're getting like 7 extra wins because they ran good last year. I think they're going to run less good this year and thus fall back down again. Like the bullpen overperformed expectations. Those are all guys that could get traded. And the starting rotation is still going to have Jake Irvin and Patrick Corbin. They got what I think is the ceiling year out of Josiah Gray. So I think he could fall off a little bit. Like there's just not a ton to like in this rotation in terms of guys to take a step forward. And then even the hitters. I think CJ Abrams is exciting. I think he's really going to be the most, exciting player. I know Whitchurch is betting him stolen bases and people got excited by his second half. He could be a great player for them. After that, Lane Thomas just had a career year, probably falls a little bit. So there's some real concerns for how they generate offense.
Yeah, I mean, Abrams, even when Abrams was excelling last year, he was still running like a 315 on base. It's not ideal for a leadoff hitter. Maybe he has a chance at leading the league in steals. He needs to get that on base up significantly if he's going to do so. I like Kybert Ruiz. I think Kybert Ruiz is a solid player, but I don't like this Nationals team until you combine Abrams and Kybert with Cruz and House and James Wood and these younger prospects that they have. Christian Vaquero way down in the minors. Maybe we see him in a few years, but 2025 I think is when we start seeing Wood and Dylan Cruz and the real core of this team going forward come up. I think most of these guys get traded in season. Maybe we see these guys in September. But Charlie, do we have a consensus under? Or are you on the Nationals under as well? Any other team? Any other way you want to bet on this team?
Yeah, no, we are in lockstep with the Nationals under here. I mean, you just look at this team and I look at these guys and it's literally a minor league roster for the most part. And the back end of the bullpen is, rotation is horrible. The top end of the bullpen, aside from, I'm personally high on Josiah Gray, but aside from him, is not great. And then they went out into free agency and all they did was sign misfits that are below average, that they're just plugging into holes, and then we'll flip at the deadline if they even flip them at the deadline or even cut them. Because guys like Senzel and Gallo, I just don't have high hopes for to even be a semi-productive big leaguer, especially as the ages go on. So I just, when you look at this team, I don't understand how they come close to the high 60s in the win total. I think like 60 is probably even being kind to them at this point, especially come deadline. If they trade their bullpen, then they're going to be looking for like me or you to get off our seats and hop right into the bullpen and hop in and throw gas, because at this point, like, they're going to have not any major league talent on this roster. So totally in on this under here. And then, like you guys mentioned, CJ Abrams' ceiling. I like his stolen bases over 36.5. He had 47 last year. Most projections, especially ATC, is right around that 40 mark. So, I think the numbers come down on him to lead the league in stolen bases a decent amount. So I'm not playing it there, but I would still take that over on stolen bases, because I think that there's going to be more, attempts this year. And I think that a guy, as long as Abrams stays healthy, I think he's only going to get better and better. So buying his upside, but the rest of the Nationals, I'm just very, very, very low on.
Yeah, I like their farms. Nope. I like their farm system. Do not like their major league roster for 2024. Anthony, you had final thoughts on the Nationals?
Yeah, when you play a system, when you play like an offensive strategy where you're going to put a lot of balls in play and try to manufacture runs, you have to steal. It's like Cleveland, Oakland. These teams are stealing a ton of bases. So the light is just going to be like blaring green for Abrams to run whenever he wants. And thus, like, other teams that are better might not want Abrams stealing in front of their best hitters to risk outs. But for the Nationals, who's their best hitter?
So the one thing I want to question with the Nationals is the organizational philosophy. There's been some viral memes from spring training. It doesn't matter how hard you throw ball four, was one of the signs posted alongside their bullpens. And they've had some other old school mentality going around. So directionally, I don't know if I love the top-down approach from this Nationals organization. They don't seem to be particularly analytically inclined, and that's just another reason to bet against this team. Yeah, the lack of power, the focus on putting the ball in play and not striking out doesn't really mesh with where baseball is headed in 2024. Gentlemen, before we get out of here, I just want to recap quickly our favorite win total bets, your favorite player prop or player awards bet, and then finally your best bet for this division. Anthony, I'm going to throw it to you first.
Yeah, so here's a fun one for you. The team that the Phillies were scheduled to play on opening day has won the World Series each of the last 3 years. It was Atlanta in 21, it was Houston in 2022, it was Texas last year. So congratulations to the Atlanta Braves on their 2024 World Series title. All they have to do now is sign Will Smith back, and they will be set to win the World Series. But my favorite win total is the Washington Nationals, under 66.5. My favorite prop is Bryce Harper to win the MVP at 12-1. And then my favorite overall bet will also go Marlins under. So I like a couple of unders at the bottom of the division. I think the top remains supreme, and maybe the Braves can finally cure their quote unquote playoff demons, even though they won the World Series like 2 years ago.
The Nationals and Marlins both go under. Hard to imagine the Mets not going over. Charlie, give me your favorite bets for the National League East.
Yeah, my favorite win total is definitely the Nats under. I just do not see a world where this team wins, more than that 60 game mark. Favorite stat leader award bet all over Austin Riley to lead the league in home runs and RBI. I think that if he continues to hit the way he did in the second half of the season, the sky's the limit for him, and we could easily see him establish himself as the best power bat in that lineup. And then my best bet overall, probably Trey Turner over 27.5 stolen bases. He had 30 last year, despite for the first 3 months being, a big hole in that lineup. So I expect him to be just as good this year from what we saw at the back half of the last season. Expect stolen base attempts to go up here. So that's my favorite bet aside from the ones I just mentioned.
Yeah, consensus agreement on the Nationals win total under. I think this is way too high. Again, projected range 58.6 to 65. Pacoda's 4 wins lower, 3.5 wins lower than they were last year. This team hit their peak last season. I think you're playing the number that is essentially the peak of where I expect them to finish. Under 65 or better for me. In terms of player prop, I'm going to echo Anthony on Bryce Harper to win MVP. I think the projections are underselling him to a significant degree this season, but I really do like the alternate pass approach concerning the Braves props, where you're either betting Acuna to stay healthy and win the Triple Crown, you're betting Acuna to miss significant time and taking guys like Michael Harris and Austin Riley to be the stars on that team and to potentially win some hardware. And then in terms of my favorite bet for this division, it is the Atlanta Braves to win the World Series, the one actual one-unit World Series bet that I've made. Plus 650 right now. Would take that down to about plus 500. They were plus 250 at the start of the postseason last year. I think there's a very clear separation with the Braves and the Dodgers against everybody else. The projected odds right now for that are anywhere between plus 300 and plus 475. I'm certainly closer to that plus 300 mark, considering I have the highest projection on the Braves of anybody out there. So Braves to win the World Series, the one World Series bet I would place right now. And I think on playoff time, that number is no better than plus 250, which it was at the start of last postseason, or plus 300. And that'll do it for this episode of Payoff Pitch presented by BetMGM. Make sure to download the free award-winning Action Network app to follow all of the Action Network experts so you can track your own picks. If you're in North Carolina and excited to do some MLB betting, make sure to check out the link in the episode description. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to catch all of our divisional previews here on Payoff Pitch. For Anthony and Charlie, I'm Sean Zerillos. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you every Monday, Tuesday, and Friday throughout the season.